What happens when retirement gives you freedom, but no direction? In this episode, I chat with Henry Quinlan, and we discuss identity loss, social disconnection, and the challenge of filling time that was devoted to work. You're going to walk away with a clear idea of how to create purpose, how to reconnect with what matters, and how to build a meaningful second act. Let's get to it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Beyond Retirement. I'm your host, Jacquie Doucette, and today I'm joined by Henry Quinlan. Henry's a graduate of Boston College and Suffolk University Law School, and he's a founder and CEO of Omni Publishing Company. He's currently a senior achiever at MIT AgeLab, whose mission is to improve the quality of life of older people and those who care for them. Since his retirement, he's turned his focus to publishing the Memoirs of seniors and giving talks to retirees on how to achieve happiness in their senior years. Much of his work is available through the Golden Years video library. Henry, thanks for joining me today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
I see you've had a long career with Omni Publishing, with a lot of variety in your topics. What changed for you after retirement to pull your focus into seniors?
Yeah, well, like many men and women, when I retired, I got bored. And a friend of mine said, you've been in book publishing all your life. I know people who would like to know how to write their memoirs. Why don't you go to a senior center? So I called a senior center and offered to give the talk. And so I gave the talk, and the woman called me afterwards, who was the director, and she said, they like you. Can you talk on anything else? I said, I think I can. And so that's how it started. Now I've given over 300 talks all over New England. And during the COVID, I was giving them in Zoom all over the country.
Wow.
And I found that, seniors, men in particular, have a hard time in their senior years. Women are by nature much more social, and men grow up in the competitive world of business, and that's not always the most conducive to building relationships. So a lot of men struggle in retirement, and so that's been one of my focuses is on men. And as an example, I was giving a talk in a town outside of Boston, and a man stood up and he said, all my friends have died. I want you to tell me how to make new friends. And I said to myself, wow, how good is that? He recognizes he has an issue and tries to get help. So I recommend the basic is, what are your interests? And go to people who have your interest. As an example, I've lived in many places in my life, both internationally and nationally. And the first thing I did whenever I moved was join a tennis club, because I'm a tennis player, and that gave me an automatic connection to people of a similar interest, and then branch out from there. So that's how it happened.
How do you... No, I guess how do you isn't the right question. What surprised you most when you started talking to seniors groups about retirees in general?
Two things. The restraints put on people by what will other people think. And I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who after a talk will come up to me and say, I always wanted to. And I'll say, well, why don't you? Well, I don't. And a lot of it's just a cover up for it's outside of my character. And I'm not like that. So what I find is that people like that, their life really never changes. So when they get into retirement, what they spend their time spending a lot more. So let's take shopping. So they'll shop now for 2 or 3 hours a day, and they fill their time by doing the same thing there. While inside them, they have this yearning I really want to write a book because I can't, book is my world, so I hear that more often than not. And so it's what will other people think? And then with men, it's just plain inertia. Some men who have, and I have a cousin who's recently died. He was a very high in an international corporation, and he retired, and he just sat down and didn't do anything. And I could watch him mentally go down. And his thought was, he would say to me, "Well, I was so high, I can never replace that." So it's the ability to know the past is the past, and you have to move on. You can't live in the past.
And how do you help people do that? How do you help them realize that what they used to be or what they did before doesn't need to carry forward?
Well, by example, but people who, for instance, retired military, a general. He wants to be called general. You're not a general. You used to be a general. You're not a general. Then move on. And some people just can't move on. And so I say, well, instead of using the phrase move on, what would you like to do now? What really would turn you on? And then that gives them a hint of, okay, I always wanted to. Well, there you go. So that's in front of you, not behind you. Life is in front of you. Live your life going forward. And many people, I happen to think of a funny story while I'm talking about. I've had this happen a couple of times. A man will come to my talk and say, "My wife kicked me out of the house this morning and said, go down and listen to this guy, see if you can learn anything." Or the other one I hear, I give a talk on, creating a new life in retirement. And there were 50 women in front of me, not one man.
Oh, wow.
And they uniformly said, "My husband should be here." And with men, it's a real issue. They're not social by nature. I use the analogy of tennis again. So visualize two tennis courts. On one court, women are playing doubles. On the other court, men are playing doubles. When you change sides, the men change sides. The women stop at the net and chit-chat. And that is probably the best evidence I can give you of that. So it's very hard for men. And, the higher they went, sometimes it's very difficult. They say, "Well, I was a president. I can't." Well, you used to be. So I played tennis. Here's another good example. I played tennis on a private court down near my hometown. And it was a retired bank president home. And his wife came out to talk to me and the friends. He let us use their court. And I said, "Well, how's John doing?" She said, "John's not doing well." "Well, what's the problem?" "The bank doesn't call him." "Well, he's been retired for 2 years. Why should the bank call him?" So it's the inability of men in particular
to let go
of that exalted. And they're giving up what I say is a lost opportunity to enjoy. Life is meant to be enjoyed.
Yeah.
Not to be sitting weeping about the past, and you can't live in the past.
I found that a lot in my job before I retired. A lot of people were saying, "Oh, I can't retire. My job's my life."
Yeah,
and
right.
That's kind of what led me to what I'm doing, is to show people that it's great to enjoy your job, but your job's not your life.
Right, right.
There's got to be something else.
Right. I have I have a sister who's a judge, and she tells me the experience of going back into the courtroom, to the courthouse, on some unofficial business, but they all looked at her. What are you doing back here? Can't you give it up? And
Yep.
that's where, she went back to that world where the waters part for your honor is coming down the corridor and things like that.
Yep.
And it's a false ego build, I guess you would call it.
Do you suppose that writing your memoirs or helping people write their memoirs helps them get through that or get past that stage? Or do you think it stirs it up too much?
Well, it all depends how their attitude about writing. I mean, there's always a point in someone's life, and particularly when they're going to write about it, where it's painful. And so what I always suggest, and it's kind of a time-honored thing with writers, is leave your manuscript and then just pick up a piece of paper or do it with a computer and just write that issue full force. Let all the emotions come out, put it aside, and then the next day look at it, you'll revise it. And the next day, some people do it 6 or 7 times, but at the end of that process, they say what they want to say. And I also say in writing your memoirs, be positive. Don't carry old fights into your book. There was a famous politician state politician in Massachusetts who wrote his memoir, and he used it to settle old political scores. And the opening line of his review in the newspaper was, "Of you, we thought better."
Oh, wow.
So that says more about you as a writer than whoever the person is you're trying to attack. Having said that, too, a woman stood up and said to me, "Henry, I heard what you said, but I tell you, I wrote in my memoirs, the only thing I want to know about my in-laws is the date their obituary appears in the paper." And I said, "Unfortunately, that says more about you than them."
Yep, exactly.
So, writing their memoirs it's very helpful, therapeutic, and a lot of people have had. If you start looking at people, we've all had interesting lives, and you want to leave something for your grandchildren, children. Your children know something about your life. Your grandchildren know virtually nothing. So if you want to pass on some lessons from your life, that's an excellent way of doing it.
And I think that's another check mark in the do it in a positive fashion.
That's right.
The last thing you want to do is have your grandkids reading about you and seeing all those negative comments.
Right. Very true. Very true. So it's a great vehicle, and I recommend, everyone do it.
Is there a story that has stayed with you from people you've helped with their memoirs? Is there any story that has stuck with you over time?
Yes. So I did a book. I'll give you a couple examples both ways. So as I give my talk about everyone should write their story. So here's one very fascinating. So a woman came up to me afterwards. She stood about 5'2", maybe 102 pounds, and said to me, "One of my daughters has had a fascinating life, and I want to get some contact information from you that I can send her, and maybe you can convince her to write a story." I said, "Well, before we get to your daughter, let's talk about you. For instance, how many kids did you have?" She said, "I had 13.
Oh, my goodness.
Say no more. There's the story. And so many people don't recognize they have a really fascinating life in and of themselves. So I did a book with a man who he read all of Ted Kennedy's campaigns, and he wanted to write the book because he wanted the world to know that behind the gloss of the Kennedy name and everything was someone who actually knew what they were doing in running a political campaign. So he wrote his story, and he demonstrated how in ways that politically were important. For instance, Ted Kennedy's first campaign for the Senate, he ran against a man by the name of Edward McCormick, who was the nephew of the former Speaker of the House, John McCormick. The final night of the debate, the final sentence in the debate was McCormick turned to Ted Kennedy and said, "If your name was Edward Moore, your candidacy would be a joke." And that ended the campaign, the debate.
Wow.
Jerry, who was the author and the campaign manager, immediately ran onto the stage, grabbed Ted Kennedy, and moved him off. I said, "Well, you got to, in writing the book, you got to explain that. Why did you do that?" And he said, "Well, as soon as that remark came out, I saw Ted Kennedy getting red in the face, and I knew there was going to be problems." And he said, "When I got to him, Ted Kennedy said to me, 'I'm going to punch that son of a bitch in the nose.'" And Jerry said, "No, you're not," and took him off. And so the one thing I do tell all amateur writers in writing your story is the power of anecdotes. So an anecdote is a little story that explains a fact. So I did a book with Casey Jones, the former Celtics coach. So he writes in his book or in the manuscript, there's 2 seconds left in a game against the Los Angeles Lakers. We're down by a point. I call a timeout. We have a huddle, go back on the floor. Larry Bird shoots, wins the game. So I said, you got to give a little more information here. What happened in the huddle? Do you call a special play? What happens there? And he laughed and he said, "No, Henry," he said, "I call the huddle. Larry Bird leans in and says, 'Give me the ball and get out of the way.' And he scores, and that's it." So that little anecdote makes everything so much better. And so I recommend
exactly.
that you do that all the time. And I did a book with, there's another thing about being positive. So I did a book with John Cullinane, who founded the first software company in America. And so on Friday, John said, "Henry, the book is ready to go to the printer, but I want to give it one more read over the weekend, and I'll call you Monday morning." So he called me Monday morning and he said, "There's a couple of stories in there that could go either way. So I want you to take them out." And so I called him back and I took them out and I said, "Can I send it to the printer?" He said, "Yes." And he said, "Now I can die." I said what I wanted to say and it was positive. So I've always recommend being positive, but it's a great therapeutic thing to review your life. And again, lessons. I mean, he had wonderful business lessons for his sons. In taking something was an idea and making it the very first successful software program in the country. And then to show you that people who we think are geniuses always win. He writes in one chapter in his book was he did a joint venture with the founder of Cook is the CEO now. famous Apple computer. Did a joint venture with them, and it failed miserably. So there you go. They're not all wins. But that's the human side, and that's important.
You've given a number of talks about happiness for seniors.
Right.
What's the biggest myth that people believe about happiness in retirement?
That de facto retirement equals happiness. And another anecdote. So I spoke to the Mass Teachers Retirement Association, Massachusetts Teachers Retired. And so the business manager said to me, I'm going to put you in contact with the president and she will make all the arrangements with you. So she called me, and she happened to be a class in the same class at Boston College that I was, although I didn't know her. And so we chatted and said everything. She says, Henry, I just want to remind you, you're not going to tell us anything we don't know. And I said, well, to myself, that's a pretty arrogant statement, but I'll give it a try, I said. So I gave the talk, and one of the audience members stood up and said, Henry is absolutely right. He said, I focused so much on the financial side of business, of retirement. I got into retirement and I said, what the hell is this? I got nothing to do. And he said, then I ended up, before I knew it, I was sitting in an AA meeting.
Oh.
So that's the biggest myth. You know, a lot of people say, well, I can't wait till I retire. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And there's a euphoria type process that takes hold for a year or two. Maybe you do a lot of travel, things like that. But then at the end of the day, you still have a life. And as I say, just think of this. You have 100 hours a month to fill. You used to devote to your job and commuting to your job. Now, how are you going to fill that? And fill it with something that's going to give you meaning and purpose. And when you give yourself meaning and purpose, you're going to be happy. So all this came to me through a man by the name of Archer, who created the course at Harvard on happiness. And you'd say, why would Harvard have a course on happiness? Well, as he told me, he said, you know, all the kids at Harvard rank 1 and 2 in their class in high school. The first time the grades come out, half of them are in the bottom half of the class. And that's a huge blow to their ego. So they found out as a result, Harvard had a higher rate of depression of any college in the country, higher attempted suicide, because these kids, so he creates the course on happiness. And so the focus is not you're in the bottom half of your class, but look at you. I'm in one of the great universities in the world. Celebrate the positive part, take advantage of all of the things. So they found that the people who, the alumni, say 20 years out, who were most satisfied and happy with their time at Harvard were not the A students. It was generally the B and C students who took advantage of all the other opportunities that a school like Harvard can present.
And I guess that's kind of a clue for life in general. If you're taking part in things and doing a variety of activities, you're going to find more joy and more happiness overall.
Right.
Than
and
if you're just focusing on one.
You're going to find much more happiness and everything giving rather than taking. We don't need another sweater. We don't need, when you have a lifetime of experience, and I focus a lot on, in my talk, on grandchildren. So I went to my first grandson's 2-year-old number 2 birthday. And I'm sitting there. He's got a table full of his couple of cousins and neighbors, and then the parents and the friends, and and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, what the hell am I doing here? He doesn't know or care. And I thought about that. I thought a lot about it. And then I said, you know what? I'm not going to any more of those. But what I am going to do is I'm going to take them out individually on their birthday or around their birthday for a dinner, just you and me. And so I have 6 grandkids. So I started that 23 years ago. And it's been wonderful because I never go to the birthday parties. And now my grandkids, when their birthday approaches, will say to me, hey, Grandpa, when's our birthday dinner?
Yeah.
But what it did was I got to know them as people, and they got to know me.
Exactly. And you get to focus on each other and the experiences of being together. I think that's great.
Right. And then the other thing I did every Christmas, I have a Christmas party just for the grandkids. No parents. And I started out with, so I started out with doing dinner, pizza, magic tricks, and now we play blackjack. But I deal, so I make sure they all win. And so it's a wonderful time. And at my 80th birthday, one of my granddaughters stood up and said, if I didn't have Grandpa's Christmas party, I wouldn't know Sally, my cousin here, like I do. So there's all kinds of good benefits to have.
That's nice of her to come out and say that.
It was very touching.
I think that people in general don't say thank you or show what they're grateful for in a timely fashion. Like they wait until you're gone, and at your funeral isn't the time to say, "Hey, I'm glad Grandpa did parties." It's like to let you hear it is important.
Yeah, right.
So one of the other talks that you give is about AI for seniors. Can you talk a little bit more about that? About what's important to for seniors to know?
So I played tennis with a man who was probably the smartest man I ever met. He's from India, and so he graduated Mumbai University. And when he graduated, he wanted to get a degree in robotics. So he and his professor searched the world, who has the best robotics course in the world? And they settled on Moscow State University in Russia. And he applied, and they said, well, we'll certainly accept you. Your grades are great, but you don't speak Russian. But if you come here in the summer, take a course in Russian, and pass an exam, we'll admit you. He did, got admitted, and then graduated number 1 in the class. Very smart guy. So I meet him. He moved to America, working for a singer. And so we're having lunch after tennis about 3 years ago, and he said, Henry, do you do anything with AI? I said, do anything? I don't even know what it is. So he said, I think you ought to start looking at it. So I did. And it was moving along, bumping along, and there were errors, plainly, you could see them. But in the last year, it has accelerated so fast. And now I've given maybe 30 talks on it. And it is the results of my talk are pretty uniform. Half of the audience wants to know more and move on. The other half say, I'm out. And now in the last 3 or 4 months, I'm sensing a real backlash, because what is happening is they're starting to see that the jobs for their kids getting on to college are not going to be there. And they're starting to see that all the power is going to could end up in 2 or 3 men. Trump has prohibited any regulation in America. So they're going willy-nilly. And there's some ugly things happening on negative with chat box and things like that. But it's all unregulated. And it's going to change society. So I always say, in 10 years, it could be 30 or 40 million less jobs in America. Then what? And I'd say the only solution that I can see is we're going to have guaranteed income. And then there's always someone who raises their hand and say, that's socialism. And I say, well, I don't care what you call it, but what's your solution? I don't have one. I said, well, you can't leave 30, 40 million people without income. And so these are some of the things that are starting to become apparent to people, and I'm sensing a bigger backlash. What? And they're saying, whoa, what are we doing here? Well, the benefits are substantial. And I gave a talk with a couple of professors from MIT, and one of the issues that came up with doctors. So they expect within 3, maybe 4 years, there'll be an AI doctor available to everyone who is the equal to the top doctor in every field in medicine. So when you go being examined by a doctor who's the very top for whatever your ailment is, that's amazing. And so when I gave this talk, a woman stood up and she said, well, I am a doctor. And I agree. I see where it's heading. But she said, I think I'll have a place because AI can't provide empathy. And I said, well, I agree with you because I don't know. Well, 6 weeks later, I read they're working on an AI tool that provides empathy. So there won't be, just for there won't be, let's say, 100,000 doctors in this particular area. But with AI, there may be 50. So it'll be the very top. It's not going to wipe out doctors completely, but it's going to do a hell of a job. And you can take that through lawyers. Same thing. It's almost every week I'm reading about a new class of jobs. So Forbes magazine came out with a recommendation for your grandchildren. This is what they should aim at. Being a tug operator, being a dam operator, and people used to say, oh, plumbers, they won't replace. Oh, yes, they will. They have robots now that can get under the sink. So it's kind of scary in that part, and it should be regulated because it's, unfortunately, my experience in knowing some business people completely lack empathy, and all they know is their goal, and they could care less about the impact of their goal. If they get their goal, that's good, but for society, it's not good. Then the very ultimate of it all is AI creates another sentient being who is smarter than humans. And these other beings get together and say, what the hell do we need humans for? So one of the founders of AI, Geoffrey Hinton, is dedicating his life to slowing down and getting regulation because it is really going too fast. And unbridled ambition by some is just not a good thing.
So you talk about the idea that they'll become smarter than the humans, but it's the humans writing the code that puts them together. How do you anticipate?
Well, they can write the code. They can take it and improve it. Just think of movies. This movie is a good example. AI actors, AI filming, all done on a laptop. And I read recently a column of someone in Los Angeles Times who said, you better get out if you're in the movie industry, because LA is going to be like Detroit when the car business moved out. So when the movie business is gone, so those are just some of the, and these are all society. And thinking that our politicians can handle any of these is kind of ludicrous.
Yeah, there's a lot. Society is moving forward very quickly.
It's too quickly in my mind. Yeah.
Hard to keep up.
I mean, I know a young woman who graduated summa cum laude University of New Hampshire. Now, if my daughter graduated summa cum laude, I'd sit back and say, she's all set. She can't get a job. And now, the first time in America, the entry-level jobs in many industries are being taken by AI, and that's just going to get better, bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah. Hard to get a higher up job if you haven't had the entry-level job to start out.
True. Now here's the other issue. You're an executive in XYZ company, and you're making $600,000 a year, and you are being replaced by an AI agent. What do you do?
Live out of your car?
You're living a lifestyle to $600,000, and suddenly you don't have any income.
Yep.
I mean, the ramifications are so serious, and there are very few people making serious. I mean, it's just starting. And I do think that there's going to be a huge backlash. I don't know how you unwind it. That's the other problem.
Yeah. Well, it's not something that we're going to solve, I don't think.
No, not my lifetime, that's for sure.
Moving back to retirees, how do you suppose, or why do you suppose that some people struggle so much more with that transition into retirement than others do? I mean, you've talked about men being, higher up and not doing the social thing as well, but in general, some people seem to struggle a whole lot more.
Well, a lot of it is our economy, our advertising. So I spoke in front of a group of investment people who deal with retirees. And I showed on the screen a silver-haired, attractive couple dancing on the beach. And then the message was, if you invest with us, this is you. 99% of America or the world is going to look at that couple and say, that's not me. What's wrong with me? And maybe if I save more. And while I'm saying this, one of the persons in the audience said, Henry, hold up a minute. He goes into his bag, pulls out their brochure, and there's the picture. He said, that's exactly what we're selling. And it's a myth. They create the golden life, but when they get into the golden life, now what? So if you go, the whole idea of this, I am a member of the MIT AgeLab, and the director of the lab wrote a book about the future on retirement and the golden age. And he talked about the villages down in Florida, which is thousands of houses, and they keep them busy, all kinds of activities. But it's also very confined and very profile is very similar, racially, ethnicity, and everything else. And he, in his book, he says this is not this is a time warp. This is not what's going to happen, really. But in fact, it is, and for a certain group of people, it just is almost a mindless. But if you want to have a life that brings you meaning and purpose, you got to set out and try to discover who am I? What would I like to do that really, a lot of people in their seniors, some people it's work. And that's okay. That's what brings them their purpose and their meaning. And we all have to discover that ourselves and then go for it. And then all of the other things hold us back, be it what will other people think or financial, and not necessarily, financial I have found is kind of a cast-all excuse to do nothing.
Yeah, I found that as well. And I think that's a big point, is going out and finding something. So
right.
What's one small step that you can suggest that people take, this week, if they're not, if they're stuck?
Who am I? The basic thing, look back on your life. One of those times that when you were doing something, you had no concept of time. You were so immersed into it that you were part of it. And that gives you an inkling what's in there. So try to discover those moments. And that's a guide to what you ought to be. Some people, here men are more than women, but some men, since their time they were 20 or 19 or 18, said, when I get to retirement, this is what I'm going to do. It's a lifelong ambition. Obligations of family and work prevent it, but when they get there, boom, they do it. Some women do too, and it can come at any time. I always remember Grandma Moses started painting at 78.
Yep.
So and when people say it's too late, I say it's never too late.
Until they're putting you in that box.
That's right. And the more people who recognize it, the better off they're going to be. And, I always end my talk with, don't look up and say, why don't I have that mansion on the hill? Look down, you're going to see an awful lot of people don't have what you have. Be thankful and go forward.
I think that's a good place to put an end to things. I think that's a good quote to step off from. Where can people find you, Henry, if they want to know more about you?
On goldenyearslibrary.com. All my talks are on video, and they can purchase them there.
Okay, I'll make sure the link is in the show notes for that.
Yeah.
It's been great talking to you. You've got some great stories to keep us going and to make people think a little bit about.
Yeah, well, that's
what's important.
A series of stories,
Yeah,
and they're great vehicles. That's how books were created. People telling stories.
And that's it entirely. Your life is a story if you just take the time to think about that.
That's true. Very true.
Thanks very much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me.
And that's it for this episode of Beyond Retirement. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope you enjoyed it. Are you ready to start rocking your retirement? Head on over to www.beyondretirement.ca/rocking it and sign up to plan out your own roadmap for retirement. Don't wait till it's too late.